afternoon, secular fam. I'm so glad to be back after the holiday weekend. I hope that you're all keeping cool and keeping busy. We are sliding deeper and deeper into fascism. And for me, leaning into the resistance and participating in trainings and workshops has helped me to stay busy and feel like I'm not just clutching my pearls. This past week, I've enjoyed some of the content that's coming from both Surge, it's SURJ, showing up for racial justice, and the Working Families Party, or WFP. I've been learning more about deep, and some people call it relational canvassing. And I've met a couple people in my neighborhood interested in meeting their neighbors and providing whatever kind of mutual aid is needed in our community. So if you're interested in joining us, and I'm in the kind of north central Phoenix area, please go ahead and send an email to info@secularaz.org. And I actually saw what looked like probably the leftovers of what was an attempted ICE raid right here in my own neighborhood. So it's no longer things that I'm seeing on my social media. It's things that are happening in my very own neighborhood. So stay vigilant, folks, and be sure to show up for those folks who are truly living in fear right now. But for today, we have local journalist TJ LaRue. TJ has been researching and reporting on homegrown hate groups. He is a staff writer for the Phoenix New Times and has worked at Arizona State University's Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. He was also recognized for Best Community Service Project Reporting in the 2023 EPPY Awards. So you might have to explain that to us, TJ. He holds a master's degree in investigative journalism from Arizona State University and a bachelor's degree in public policy and Latin American studies from the University of Chicago. You know, we have a lot of connections. So my mom was from Nebraska, but then her family, they were farmers, ended up moving to the northwest suburbs of Chicago. But again, it was a very small farm town. How long did you spend in Chicago?
I was there a little bit over 4 years. I went to college there and spent a couple of months in the city then before I left and came out west again.
It's a super fun city. I love Chicago. There's so much to do. Taste of Chicago, super fun. Last time I was there, my son and I actually went to go see Tenacious D at the Aragon Ballroom. So that was super fun too. One of the best concerts I've ever been to. You ever have a chance to see Tenacious D, I highly recommend it. But did I miss anything in your bio, TJ? Is there anything you'd like to add there?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think I can probably speak to my biographical experience a little bit. But I think you hit the main points for sure.
Right on. So yeah, how did you end up getting into this kind of work? Tell us a little bit also about the work that you do.
Yeah. It's actually kind of my career in journalism was basically kickstarted by doing this kind of research. I graduated from Arizona State University's Cronkite School with a master's in investigative journalism. And basically, the way the program works, it's a quick master's program, 2 semesters of classes, and then a basically like a type of work experience. The summer after I finished classes, I worked in the Cronkite School's Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. At the time, it was run by Maud Bielman. Our project was her last for the Howard Center, and she stepped down. And Mark Greenblatt has now taken the reins there. Well experienced correspondent from most notably from ABC. And basically, our project that summer, which was given to us, was to report on the Arizona Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, which is basically one of the at the time definitely one of the foremost groups who was kind of gaining some notoriety, and um, there was controversy surrounding the history of the organization and some of the people who were involved, and ultimately some of the teachings of the group. And basically, our project was to track. They're based in Arizona, but had begun kind of spreading out as a national movement. They did during the coronavirus pandemic. They did a big national tour, kind of capitalizing on a lot of conservative frustration about whether it be mask mandates or these were their terms, and basically government, there, this sentiment of like government overreach during that, public health crisis. And met a lot of connections. They made a lot of connections during that tour, and they made a lot of stops. And that kind of set the groundwork for them kind of starting to spread um, their legs and arms, their tentacles, I guess, across the
Hmm.
country, and kind of trying to um, do what they could to kind of spread their you know to some degree their ideology, but a lot of to mostly to spread their influence. Um, and the way that manifested was they um, basically there are across the country in almost every state, there are boards that certify peace officers, which is any law enforcement officer, from city police to county sheriff's offices, um, and their main effort in their activities, besides just kind of holding public events, was to try to hold trainings for peace officers that would basically require toward ongoing uh, required hours that peace officers have to. It's called continuing education that peace officers have to participate in to maintain their license. So basically, they were trying to become more officially accepted by having these trainings for law enforcement officers across the country. And they spread to basically a couple of states, and our goal was to contract that. And there had been some reporting done in Texas already about how much training was going on in Texas, which actually was quite a bit. A significant portion of counties, they are well established there. So going along the process, we made out to track that. And in the end, we ended up interviewing Sheriff Richard Mack, who is the founder and leader of the organization, was previously a sheriff in Southern Arizona, and kind of gained some notoriety for having success in a Supreme Court case, and kind of used that to propel, I think, his own credibility, and at times, made claims that about his own Supreme Court victory that kind of exceeded the actual decision that the Supreme Court made. Um, but so that was kind of how I got my start in being interested um, in reporting on extremist groups, in especially in Arizona. Um, Now at Phoenix New Times, I've to some degree also have done similar work, and have worked to track kind of the um, extremist groups in Arizona, especially in the national framework. Basically, what's going on in Arizona, when I think when people think of extremist groups, they often think of what we call hate groups. For instance, the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan is like kind of the seminal picture of an violent extremist group in the United States. Um, there's a number across the country that, especially kind of in the aftermath of Donald Trump losing his reelection campaign in 2020, um, were basically, during that period of the coronavirus pandemic, we're doing a lot more organizing, especially digitally, and kind of created the groundwork, laid the groundwork for the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. And I think that was kind of a wake up moment for America in terms of realizing, how active these groups are. There's a wide variety, and they have kind of different fundamental principles, but they, to some degree, overlap. Some are more focused on white supremacy and pushing, this theory that there's an active effort to um, eliminate basically the supremacy of white people in the United States, and the Great Replacement theory is what it's called. But there's a lot of also anti-government um, anti-government groups and sentiment in uh, the United States, and actually where Arizona comes in uh, is it's much more the focus is much more on kind of anti-government um, uh, groups. There's a lot more of that than say like white supremacy groups. Um, I think the difficult thing about characterizing uh, these groups as belonging to Arizona, and this was a challenge that I ran into in reporting um, on this matter, is so much of organizing happens digitally now.
Hmm.
It's not super important for groups to be gathering in person, to be able to push their ideas and ideology to other people. So much of this happens over the web. But I will look to this article that I wrote in February of this year, based on the um, 2023 um, Southern Poverty um, Law Center's report on hate and extremist groups in America. So basically, there are, according to their according to the SPLC, there are a lot of hate groups and extremist anti-government groups operating in Arizona, and in some ways, Arizona is a hotbed for it. While we're not really seeing, mass demonstrations or counter protests like we've seen in the Northeast, there's certainly a lot of activity going on, and part of the thing the SPLC doesn't really define activity, what that means, but it can mean a variety of things. In part, leaving flyers around, detecting, the operation is based out of a certain state. But I did my best basically to try to track down, these groups and see what what was going on. So I think being a border state, basically the main takeaway that I have is a lot of these groups are focused on immigration and the border. And obviously with the re-election of Donald Trump in 2024, and this whole Project 2025 kind of being worked out, and we're already seeing the immigration enforcement system radically changing. I don't think anyone would deny that. Um, in Arizona, it's an interesting situation because we have, of course, the Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs, and with Hobbs in place, kind of a lot of the extreme measures that state Republicans wanted to, push basically in order to help Trump fulfill his wishes to um, totally change the immigration system and carry out mass deportations have been thwarted to some degree. In Texas, you basically have laws that are deputizing, citizens, and across the country, we're seeing that the administration is um, encouraging bounty hunters to do their own immigration enforcement work. So there's been this conversation in the Arizona legislature about some of these laws or some of these proposed laws um, that would basically give the state government a greater hand in enforcing immigration policy. And to some degree, that's legally questionable. The Constitution basically gives the federal government power over enforcing immigration law. Um, so while Hobbs has been governor, and I've been basically um, every single bill that Katie Hobbs vetoes, and this year I believe we're at 173, or I can't remember exactly.
Something like that. Yeah.
174, yeah. This has been quite the experience for me. I don't know how many hours I've spent writing up every single bill that Katie Hobbs has vetoed, but that story, or that I should say, it's more of a file than a story, is a view into, what this state would look like if we didn't have, a democratic ever, if we didn't have powers separated between the legislative and the executive branches. So I definitely encourage people to take a look at some of those, and if you haven't, and see, I basically, it's like a pain to go through and look at the bills on the Arizona legislature. So, my work has kind of been to, you know, summarize these bills in a way that in plain language that makes sense to a normal reader. There's obviously a lot of legislative jargon in the bills themselves. Um, so yeah, I highly encourage people to take a look at that. And it's a huge document, so like you can just search if there's a particular issue or keyword, you can find what those bills um, that have been vetoed look like. It gives a portrait of a very, very different state, that
Mhm.
if Republicans hold the both chambers in 2026, and Hobbs, or a Democrat um, is not, doesn't win that election, we're going to be living in a very different state. So I think for now, we can kind of go through some of these groups that we've identified as the most noteworthy in Arizona. And I'll say this with the caveat of it's very difficult to know exactly what these groups are doing and to what extent they are active in Arizona. Obviously, they're private groups. We were able to with the CSPOA when we did that research, we made records requests of a lot of the counties where sheriffs who were aligned, and that was public information on CSPOA's website. They would say, we this sheriff is a part of our group. Um, those we would records request those counties to try to see if we could find information on what they were discussing through official channels of the county. And actually we one sheriff in Michigan, or one, I should say, one county in Michigan, did provide us with a lot of records about the internal communications of CSPOA, and actually recordings of their meetings. And that was one way we were able to glimpse a lot of what the intentions and the goals of the organization were.
Wait, are you telling me that they used official government channels to discuss the partnership and propping up of militia organizations? Wow.
Yes, yeah, right. It's pretty ludicrous actually that a sheriff, the most important law enforcement official in the county, would use official channels to talk about CSPOA activities. And it was, I mean, for as a journalist, truly a treasure trove of material. And I think that's what that in particular made our reporting really strong, because we were actually able to get inside of the agency.
Mm.
So certainly, yeah, I mean, it's kind of baffling that a public official would do that, but ultimately it also led us to get into the rat's nest, if you will, and see what was going on inside the walls.
Right, because if that's just one county, I mean, I can only imagine what is happening in some of these rural counties and what kind of collaboration is taking place between, say, like the Yavapai County Preparedness Team and the Yavapai County Sheriff. And I'm not saying that any of that is going on necessarily, but it would be an interesting records request to find out what kind of ties they might have.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So, of the ones, because and the link for the article is here, everybody, in the chat, because you do break down several of these different groups. Can you? I mean, mostly they're in rural spaces. Is there one particular space in Arizona? Do you find that they tend to be more um, closer to the border counties, or are they, where are these places, or where are these organizations meeting up and having their little meetings and trainings and all that?
Yeah, certainly the southern border is the hotspot near the southern border. And I think, as we go along in this administration, there's going to be more potential for operation near the border. I think we might see that popping up more. As you mentioned, Yavapai preparedness is Prescott is certainly, I think that's the largest. Um, you know, town or city in Arizona with kind of a more widespread, I think, anti-government views, and more uh, I think more powerful, citizens who hold those views are working out there. Um, but yeah, I think the southern border, especially because it's a less populated area, there's a lot more um, room for some of these groups to operate without kind of the public being aware of it. It's a little bit more, difficult in Prescott per se, and these uh organizations are like Yavapai preparedness. Yeah, that's a bit different, where it's like not quite operating in as much secrecy. They've have held public meetings, that people can attend. And for some of these, we're seeing, I think, to some degree, um there's a kind of a bifurcation of you have groups that are more focused on kind of spreading the word, like doing kind of this, I think depending on your perspective, public education or propaganda work, and kind of spreading their own perspectives and beliefs. But you have other groups that are operating in, near total secrecy. And those are the ones that it's harder to keep an eye on. Um, and yeah, I did a story actually about um, Christoph Goldsmith, he works out of New York. He's based in New York, but he was a veteran, or he is a veteran, and has kind of made basically a career um, out of infiltrating his white supremacy groups or hate groups through online channels. And that's his way of getting um, inside the nest. He kind of is able to code talk, or code switch basically,
Mhm.
and and gain, like, has gained the trust um, of organizations from the inside.
Um, so I have a question here in the Q&A real quick, and I think it's from Representative Contreras. Um, and the question is, are there any left-wing extremist groups? I guess here in Arizona or otherwise in your research, are there any?
That's a great question. Not as far as I've been able to see. I think there's a lot of, obviously, um, kind of evidence-free accusations thrown around about, like, left-wing George Soros funded groups, but yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell, I think there's not really much going on from the left wing. Um, there's I just haven't seen that so far. I mean, I guess it depends on what in the future, like, it depends on what extremism is. I mean, um, it makes me wonder, will those groups develop in response to, potentially, like, we are, I would tend to agree that the way that things are developing, there's a power grab going on at the highest levels of the federal government, and trying to, basically overstep constitutional boundaries. And it makes me wonder if there will be kind of that organization taking place, but I haven't seen really any left-wing extremist organizing. Um,
Yeah, it's funny because I go to these protests where I hear from all these like right-wing accounts and even elected officials saying, "Wow, look at all the paid Soros protesters," and I have yet to get my Soros check. So that is incredibly disappointing. I'm not going to the right protest, clearly. Um, how many of our legislators or even other elected officials, let's start with the legislature, because I know for sure Kwong Nguyen is, a proud card carrying member of the Oath Keepers, right? I know here up in Deer Valley School District, Paul Carver, proud card carrying member of the Three Percenter militia movement. So do you know how many of our elected officials at the legislative level are involved with these, or even if you know that they go and speak at their meetings, that's an involvement, I would say.
yeah, it certainly would be. Actually, yeah, I haven't researched the members of the legislature, but obviously there are some connections among some of those legislators, with a wide variety of right-wing groups. We've Wendy Rogers is one of them, um, and yeah, I mean, I think part of the question here actually is, you know part of what is concerning, I think what, everybody should be keeping an eye on is the institutionalization of kind of these groups, they're or the ideology a lot of times that they push. Basically, these groups were operating outside of the mainstream, during I think probably during the Obama administration, and with Charlottesville in 2018, I think that was the first signal that, these groups felt emboldened by President Trump's um rhetoric and, kind of winks and nods to those groups, which, I think the whole campaign messaging was centered around, anti-immigrant rhetoric.
Mhm.
Um, and so, that's their guy. He's emboldened them, and that it wasn't quite. And then I think after January 6th, especially, there's definitely been more of a kind of more extremism going on with the actual legislators themselves, even if there's not a uh, connection to some of these groups, which I suspect there are, more than we can find. But I think they themselves have been kind of leaning more into some of these extremist views. We're seeing more and more of that, and we're seeing at times, some of the more moderate legislators kind of being forced out pretty much because of the base is energized around, the more MAGA um, messaging in the um, campaigns.
Well, I mean, I think of specifically a Republican, the primary of the Maricopa County recorder, Stephen Richer, and now we've got Heap in there, and I know three people personally now who have gotten one of those letters, and then a correction letter, and and even I don't know that I would call him a moderate Republican, but the former county superintendent, Steve Watson, certainly wasn't running on a MAGA platform the way that his primary opponent, Shelley Boggs, was. And now she's explicitly saying, don't even bother, basically, coming for any of these school board appointments unless you can prove that you're MAGA. So yeah, it's unfortunate, and I think for some Democrats too, or people, a lot of people, maybe they register as Democrats or Republicans or independents if they're in those districts, just so they can maybe try to swing it the other way, but it doesn't always work. I do have a question here in the chat, and it comes from Imran. Can you talk about Project 2025 based or groups based in Arizona and any reporting that you have done on them? So I guess groups that work in trying to push that 2025 Project 2025 agenda.
Right. Yeah. So, Project 2025, with, that being kind of what's taking place at the federal government level, I think that's, not necessarily something in the kind of confines of Arizona. Um, you have to excuse me 1 second. Hopefully, Gene, you can take over for just a little bit. I have to handle one thing.
Yeah, no problem. I can do that. So while TJ is taking care of that, I just want to see what's over here in the chat. Oh, I didn't see that, John. When TJ comes back, I will ask that question about the definition of extreme that you use to identify each group. Great question. I see that people are putting links up over there. Yes, I have actually heard of the Arizona Right Wing Watch, Tory. In fact, a couple of years ago, when I was essentially doxxed by somebody, the person who runs that account, this is when I was still on Twitter, reached out to me and was like, hey, just so you know, here are some steps you can take, some people you could reach out to. So at least there is a community of solidarity. Um, And let's see. And yeah, I mean, there can be extremism on both sides of the aisle for sure. I would say in Arizona, though, it does tend to be, these organized groups at least tend to be more right wing. So now, thankfully, none of you really have to listen to me vamp anymore because TJ is back. So let's get back right where we started from.
Yeah,
Have you
apologies.
ever had any? Okay, one thing I wanted to say too. So, like, even though they may not, proudly admit their affiliation with these groups, they sure do spend a lot of time fraternizing with these groups in countless other ways, right? Like, I mean, I think of Wendy Rogers and her willingness to attend like CPAC and to promote the messages coming from these really right wing accounts on Twitter and essentially embracing. I mean, Wendy Rogers straight up said that she was raising her hand like the pick me girl that she is, begging Trump to build his next desert Alcatraz here. So yeah, full fledged. I mean, there's no mincing words about it. I would definitely call her that. But so anyway, we were talking about folks that are in the legislature, and then I
Yeah,
lost my
so
train.
in
Yeah, go
Project
ahead.
2025. Yeah, so obviously part of 2020 Project 2025 is a full takeover of government. And New Times has done some reporting on how basically Trump wants to um and this was Bo Hodai, who works out of Cochise County. But Trump's goal is basically to bring in other law enforcement um agencies to work alongside, the federal government, work alongside ICE, and Department of Homeland Security. And so, yeah, I think to some degree, like what we talked about with, Hobbs being able to veto, these Republican measures. um, you know, Part of those measures are, we're seeing in all kinds of stuff, not just law enforcement. Like we're seeing it in education. I think, basically, um, it's when you look at what's going on, the goal is basically to weaken or public education, and to promote private education, pretty much. And um, like these, it's pretty much that all Republicans are voting in favor of these measures, and want to force police agencies and state law enforcement officials to work with the federal government. So yeah, the goal is certainly for Trump, and these legislators are very much bought into, it will abide by what Trump wants to do. And you don't really see like, I think in the 2010s there was a lot of like um, rhetoric from Republicans about state right, like the Tea Party, about states' rights. And oh, the Obama administration is, overstepping their boundaries in, certain things. But now that the tables have turned, it seems, there aren't really, limited government, states' rights. Um, Keeping states separate from the federal government types of conservatives out there. And I think that's, a result of basically 9 years now of Trump's kind of status as the leader of the Republican
Mm.
Party. Little by little, people have been weeded out. It's like kind of a cascading snowball. Um, so, I mean, yeah, there's definitely, I think, a lot of these bills like that are coming up in the Arizona State Legislature are, based on this Project 2025 idea of cutting Social Security programs. And when I say Social Security, I mean kind of the social safety net, not just Social
Mm-hmm.
Security, and cutting back on public education, pretty much bringing in, policing agencies to work with the federal government. And it's a great test for our system of separations of powers. And we'll see. Like, I think I think personally, one thing this this is all going to really at one time empowers the police state, right, aspect of the federal government, but at the same time, really weakens everything else about
Mhm.
the country, the United States of America, as a united concept. I think we have to remember, the United States Constitution was not the first document binding, the states into a union of some sort. There, the Articles of Confederation, we basically, came first for a couple of years, and the country experienced a lot of problems. I think the weaker the federal government gets in being able to, provide for its citizens, the weaker the country becomes, and the more likely we are to see, fracturing and civil war. And I think we're, all it will take is a major crisis, and who knows what that might be, but and I think it's even more dangerous considering the United States is kind of eking into war, involving itself um, in uh, well, certainly with in the Middle East with Israel. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of uncertainty in the geopolitical climate, internationally, but it's certainly starting to look dangerous, for the United States. And I think there's like this sentiment that war is um, good for business, kind of stemming from like World War II, but ultimately it's not true.
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
and we also already operate a very large, military industrial complex. So, we are kind of manufacturing war all the time. Um, but yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
I'm certainly, I think part of this 2025 project is to weaken the federal government. I mean, I don't know if this is the intention of the people behind it, but it seems like the end goal is to kind of fracture the United States into, no longer being a union, into being, ending kind of that central power.
It's a wild timeline that we live in. There's a couple things that are coming up. Yeah, I was quoting Wendy Rogers. She said she wanted to call it Desert Alcatraz, but I completely agree, Doris. It makes more sense to call it what it is, and it is a concentration camp. There was already a report about the conditions there, completely inhumane. People have been dying in custody from these kidnappings and abductions. In the raid in California that happened yesterday, there's a farm worker there who broke his neck on life support. The family's saying they're taking him off. This is a country that is now ordained and fully funded an attack on its own people, and we are all caught up in it, and we all have various roles to play. There's a few questions here that I'm going to try to get into. I think it was John that asked the question of what was your working definition of extreme in this work? Do you have a working definition, and what is it?
Yeah, and there it varies to some degree. I think, kind of as I mentioned, um part of the approach to this is, there are various possibilities for what extremism can be. I think it's one of the most umbrella terms. Basically, um, extremism is a challenge to the status quo at any cost, right? Like, there's um there's extremism in the sense of like anti-government sentiment, being against, the kind of the operation of um, the federal government being in power. I think it's kind of a funny state now because like a lot of those anti-government groups are actually going to be pro-government because now they have the power. But and hate falls under that. Violence is often an indicator of extremism, but not always. Like, I think basically extremism is trying to radically alter either government or society, and doing so at whatever cost necessary.
I have a question for you because a lot of these groups really just do toe the party line. And I mean, also, Tori Gantz is on this webinar right now, and she reports for Lookout magazine. And there's a great piece from Lookout today about how even Governor Hobbs is, signing some of these Project 2025 bills into law. Um, and there are many people who would consider themselves more democratic leaning or progressive leaning who also gave her the indication that it was something that she should be signing because they were partnering with with fascists essentially. I mean, and I know from working behind the scenes that there are an awful lot of us who are trying to impart, like show some of these trends to the legislators, and not in a condescending way or like I know more than you, but as we look and see trends working, especially with national organizations, we see these like HB 2112 that says that it's an anti-porn bill to protect the children, but it's really an anti-LGBTQ bill. So it's scary when we, already have these other states, that we used to be like, where they have super majorities of Christian nationalists and Christian nationalist governors and secretaries of state and boards of supervisors and everything else. But it feels like a betrayal to me when we do have those checks and balances in in play. The other question that I wanted to ask you, TJ, is about how, in your research, did you come across any of these groups that are homeschooling their children, who have started maybe micro schools or religious schools? Because these folks, to me, the ones that aren't like, in their 60s and 70s and just have like this, affinity for whatever this ideology is, but like those that actually have kids, like, have you seen any of that? Like, how much indoctrinating is happening with their children, and how much of our taxpayer dollars is going towards it? Do you have any idea?
That's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of the ESA program is kind of, along those lines. I think you see a range of it. Like, to some degree, I think it's kind of the wealthy just trying to take advantage of, a system. And there's been a lot of good reporting recently. I think, from a variety of outlets, APC 15 has been one of them, but basically documenting that this is just a wealth transfer, from, the state to the already wealthy. But yeah, I think to some degree there is going to be, or there is, some degree of, indoctrination of, children, going on. And I think it speaks to just the kind of tenor of our times. But I remember covering a press conference with, Tom Horn back in January of 2024, I believe. But basically, they were promoting, the partnership with PragerU,
Mhm.
which is very much a religious
Propaganda. Yeah.
oriented propaganda machine.
Mhm.
And there, I remember at that press conference, there were, all of these children there like holding up signs. And it was kind of alarming to me. I mean, these are obviously like, young minds highly or easily, influenced. And, as this happens more and more, I think education is no longer, is becoming less and less of a, okay, let's promote a civic kind of mentality about the Constitution, and create a foundation upon which our society can thrive, because people know how to do certain things. And um and we have professionals to do it, but the more homeschooling you get, it's pretty much education just becomes whatever the parent really wants it to be. And you have to meet certain standards in terms of math and reading and writing and that kind of thing. But ultimately anything beyond that is kind of I think we're just going to see more and more um or I should say, less and less consensus on, the history of the United States, and history and civics and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's certainly quite a bit of that. I've seen it going on. It's hard to really get a sense or quantify, how much of that is
Yeah.
happening, but it is happening.
I would love a story on that. I remember a few years back, and I think it was probably like Vice, magazine or something. They and what I remember about it, because it was like a 20-minute one of their little short documentary films on their YouTube channel. And what I remember the most was how, like, out in the open and proud this like white supremacist homeschool group in Ohio was. They were like, "Yep, here we are, and here's our curriculum, and isn't it great?" And I was like, "Whoa!" Like, they're not even really hiding in the woodwork anymore. They're out and proud. I wrote this down as I was watching a school board meeting earlier this week. You can guess which school board it is if you want to. Um, I said, because I was stunned. I was so stunned by the behavior on the school board. I couldn't even, like, I had to like write it down. So not only do they not understand how anything works, they don't want to understand how anything works. Their entire existence and ideology is grounded in their ignorance. It goes along with their religiosity because of their blind faith and adherence to patriarchal structures, no matter what. In their mind, questioning anything is bad. So how on earth can that be good for a school district and the students in it when these are the people that are running that district? Because anytime their worldview is challenged, it's like, nope, that's not true. And they just create their own narrative.
Yeah, I think that's the sign of our times. I think there we have created a system as human beings, that I don't know, to some degree I studied biology in college. And there's this concept of a species that is called eusocial beings, EU social. And the idea of eusocial beings is, they can communicate across networks that don't necessarily exist physically, or in sight. Like, they don't have to be physically together to have communication. So examples are Hymenoptera, like ants and bees, in particular. They have these complex systems of communication. Like, ants can leave, basically in their in by walking across the ground, they leave messages for other ants. So they're able to communicate with this kind of system that's not grounded in being face to face and like communicating. And we as human beings we've done that now, since basically, I mean, we've been developing, our networks of communication have changed drastically since, basically the 1930s. Like, we have the telephone being created, and the internet is this just, I mean, right now it's just an insane, like, we can communicate with anybody anywhere in the world, basically. And
Mhm.
so now, with that being the case, I think uh this is all so new for us as human beings. And we're having a hard time adapting to being able to access anything anywhere. And It, the war is for our minds. The war is taking place in all of our minds, for truth and information. And yeah, we're when you introduce something new to a society, it takes a lot of time for people to get used to it. So it basically is a matter of, people kind of get to, the internet is kind of a mirror if you're not careful with it. You can be told exactly what you want to hear, and it's a feedback loop, and that's why I think there's more and more extremism, more and more people being grounded in their stubborn beliefs because they're getting some kind of confirmation or affirmation from um, you know things online and that kind of thing.
So, Rocky, leave it, buddy. My dog just heard something. Well, okay, this is exactly what we knew it was going to be like, right, folks? I mean, we know that this in Arizona, we are home to an awful lot of. I mean, like the Eamon Bundy family. Like, there's just so much happening here. We've got legislators and school board candidates who are proudly proclaiming their affiliation with hate groups. It's a wild time to be alive, and it's really hard to find hope. But I have to ask you, TJ, in doing this kind of reporting, and also reading all of the current events happening all over the place all the time, what gives you hope these days?
Um, I think there's a lot of grassroots organizing going on right now, kind of in response. Like, I think you're seeing these protests against the Trump administration grow larger and larger. I think, people are becoming more tuned in than ever to what's going on, and um, that is like that is a major part of, I think, in many ways, like, we are building more civically engaged and aware communities. um and part of my work is to let people know what's going on. But yeah, I think there's more people who are recognizing that things are in a troubled state. And that's the foundation of being able to, I think we're in a place where, because of the I think sometimes you'll see, like, we will see the inadequacy of government to provide for people.
Mm.
There's gonna have to be a, grassroots kind of movements and organization from the people at local levels to, you know, um, take care of their communities. And um, that is, I think that's kind of the point of a lot of these protests too, is to, like, just get people aware of what's going on and what is to come.
Mhm.
Because I think there's going to be a lot of scary stuff happening.
Yeah. I mean, to paraphrase uh, Andor, there is one way out, and it is us. You know, we are the ones that are going to get ourselves out of this. And now is the time to find fellowship and to create those communities of hope and those create communities of mutual aid. So again, if you're interested in getting together, and I have friends everywhere. That's right, and we all have to get out. Also from Andor, I have friends everywhere. So like we need to connect with those people. So thank you so much, TJ, for joining us today. That you got a lot of accolades and appreciation for the work that you do, and we'll definitely be following along with your career and your reporting. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and thanks everybody for joining. It's a lot of names I recognize, and super glad to see you guys are on. And yeah, hope everybody has a great weekend as well.
Right on. All right, everybody, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Bye.